Hey, friends. So, one of the things that I've been reporting on is different movements of laity and clergy who are kind of fighting cultural leftism within Methodism and the church more broadly. And today I'm really happy to be interviewing a guy named Richard Ackerman. Richard Ackerman he goes by the handle Redeemed Zoomer. He's active on several different platforms that young people are on. And as I've tried to follow him, I've kind of come to realize I'm out of the loop. I'm now officially middle aged. I don't think I'm old yet. But Richard has been leading what's largely a lay movement and a young people's movement to reclaim the mainline. The project is called Operation Reconquista, and they have a lot of people associated with them. Richard has a much bigger YouTube channel than me. I think it's between 30 and 40 times bigger than me, and he has a lot of support in lots of different corners. United Methodists and Global Methodists have interviewed him. I've seen interviews that he's given to Mark Tooley and Ed Rodarmel, and I doubt they're the only ones. He was kind enough to say that he would visit with me today, and my agenda is to kind of talk shop around the General Assembly the PCUSA has got coming up, also the General Conference of the UMC, and then also just to kind of figure out a little bit more about him and his movement. He's an interesting person. He's a math and music double major, a junior in college in Texas, and just an interesting guy. I follow him on Twitter. I've written about him on Substack. If you don't follow my Substack, you probably should because it's a very good Substack. So anyway, enough talk about me. I want to bring Richard on camera and just thank you, Richard, for joining me. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on the show to discuss the movement and discuss the mainline churches.
Yeah, let's talk about that movement, Operation Reconquista. Let's assume that a lot of the people watching this, spending time with us, don't know what it is. How take as much time as you want, actually, just because my hope is that people on the inside of the UMC might think about affiliating with you. So tell us about Operation Reconquista.
Sure. So, even those of you who don't know anything about denominations or church politics have probably driven by some, old, beautiful, historic churches in your hometown and seen like pride flags or political slogans. Or if you actually visited one of those churches, there was this maybe old lesbian woman pastor who said that God is just a metaphor for your feelings. You've probably seen some of this. And this is because all of the old historic Protestant church institutions have basically gone woke. They've been hijacked by people with secular left-wing beliefs. And that has caused a lot of conservative Christians to leave the historic Protestant churches, to leave the mainline Protestant churches, and start new churches, whether that be conservative offshoots like the PCA splitting off from the Presbyterian Church USA, or the Global Methodist Church splitting off from the United Methodist Church. But more frequently, they just form new non-denominational churches that are, not traditional churches, not historic churches. So Operation Reconquista is a movement that tries to get the conservatives who have left these mainline churches to come back and to reclaim what was lost, to reclaim the lost heritage of the mainline churches, and to treat the mainline churches as a mission field. Because when we think of mission trips, we often think of going to like Zimbabwe or something, and that's not a bad thing to do. But there are so many people in these mainline churches who don't hear the gospel because they've been taken over by leftism, and not only are these preachers liberal on social and political issues, they're theologically liberal too, which means they don't really believe God is a real thing. They just think the idea of God can inspire us to do social justice. They basically replace God with, secular social justice, and that's it. Church is not even really about Jesus or the gospel or the death and resurrection of Christ. So Operation Reconquista there's several purposes. Like, on the one hand, it's very important for Christians to reclaim their heritage, to reclaim the churches that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers built with their own hands and donated to. But on the other hand, it's a mission field because there are a lot of, flocks, there are a lot of sheep being shepherded by these ravenous wolves in these mainline churches, and that's not okay. We need to stand up against heresy in the church, especially churches that have such an impact on the wider culture. So Operation Reconquista is an activist movement of people to try and bring the mainline Protestant churches back to the beliefs they were founded upon. And it's an alliance of people of many different beliefs. We have Presbyterians, we have Methodists, we have Episcopalians, we have Lutherans, we have Baptists. So we want to try and bring the United Methodist Church back to traditional Methodist beliefs. We want to try and bring the Presbyterian Church USA back to traditional Presbyterian beliefs, the Episcopal Church back to traditional Anglican beliefs. So we have a lot of different perspectives in our movement. We're a very diverse movement. What we're all united by is a common commitment to the gospel and a common commitment to standing for truth in our churches.
Do you think that there is a consensus opinion on what the gospel is that all of the different Operation Conquista branches would agree on?
So, in terms of how people specifically articulate the gospel, there's always going to be different ways the gospel's articulated in different places, times, and theological traditions. But what everyone does agree on is the essentials of what we would call Nicene creedal Christianity. That is the non-negotiable. So all of them would admit that the resurrection of Christ and Jesus coming again to judge the living and the dead is indispensable for understanding the gospel. So we would not tolerate anyone who says that, we would not tolerate anyone within our movement who says that the resurrection is just a nice spiritual metaphor. And we also believe that these progressive teachings on sexuality and gender are the fruits of an inward abandonment of core theological convictions. So we also take a firm stand as a movement against LGBTQ, against transgenderism, against abortion, because when a church supports these things, it's a visible indicator that they have drifted from the theological foundations of the faith.
How fair do you think it would be for someone to assess Operation Conquista as a movement that's primarily concerned with what they're against and secondarily with what they're for?
It's possible, but on our website, on our What We Believe page, we start by saying all the things we do believe, like the three ecumenical creeds, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, and the Athanasian Creed, and the five solas of the Protestant Reformation. We're distinctively a Protestant Reconquista. So it's like, if you're Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, yeah, you could support our movement, because a lot of them do support our movement, but we do hold specifically to the essentials of the Protestant Reformation, not just the essentials of Christianity more broadly speaking. So there's a lot of things we are for. We are for that. Mm-hmm. And we are cool with any church who is also for those things, even if they're not explicitly allied with us. That's why we have a large map. We have our Operation Reconquista map is a map of churches that believe the same things we do, even if they're not explicitly allied with us. Most of them either don't know about us or aren't explicitly allied with us. But the Operation Reconquista map is just a map of any church in one of these broadly liberal mainline denominations that agrees with the same fundamentals we agree with.
Yeah, so you have a number of
churches.
You have resources for people. This is not just an idea out in the ether. Give me the URL for your website.
It's Operation Reconquista, all lowercase, all one word, operationreconquista.com.
Reconquista is spelled Reconquista. That's
yes.
The historical background. I mean, I just love that you lean into like the Athanasian Creed and Project Reconquista. I mean, or Operation Reconquista. There are parts of Christian history that a lot of people don't like to talk about because it's so like overtly, masculine. But Operation Reconquista was when Christians chased the Moors out of Spain. Of course,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's a lot of effeminacy even amongst the conservatives in our denomination. Like, there are a lot of conservative pastors in the PCUSA who would agree with the same fundamentals of the faith that we would. We would say they're true churches, but they are offended by our language of the Reconquista. They think that because we call ourselves Reconquista, we're planning to like slaughter a bunch of Muslims or whatever. No, Reconquista literally means retake. Just like the Christians retook what was taken from them, the Reconquista seeks to retake what was taken from us. It's that simple.
Your posture is unapologetically, it's unapologetic, and you firmly stand on the truth. You have nothing to apologize for. And the way in which the left often tries to silence voices like yours, and I would consider mine a similar voice, would be to associate us with right-wing extremism and imply all these motives. But really, you don't seem to bite on that at all. You just seem to say, here's the truth, here's the forces at play, here's what we're going to do, watch. And that's been kind of fun to watch. Maybe you could talk for a minute. I know a lot of Methodists who listen to you go, all right, young guy, you didn't fight the fight that we fought. You don't know how unwinnable it is. They took all the high ground. There is no retake in this thing. This young man is, with his idealism, signing us up for an impossible task, and he's about to get his own butt kicked in the PCUSA. So perhaps you could talk about, we'll talk about the PCUSA for here in a bit, but for right now, maybe you could talk about the the different forces or trends that you see at play that really make Operation Conquista not just realistic, but it's going. I mean, the tone you take is it is going to win for those who stick on board and let these trends take forward. So, talk about the inevitability of your success.
Sure. So, first thing is historical context. He who keeps the institutions prospers a lot more than he who leaves the institutions and tries to start his own thing. So, the best example is Athanasius. You know, when we think of someone in the church who stood for true doctrine, who stood for the gospel against heresy, it's Athanasius. No one in the early church was more of a heretic fighter than he was. He was the hero of the Council of Nicaea. And there was a time when the Arian heretics took over the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, just the way liberal heretics have taken over our mainline Protestant churches. And Athanasius was exiled 5 different times for standing up against the Arians, but he never backed down. That's why he got the nickname Athanasius Contra Mundum, Athanasius against the world. But he never gave up, and he eventually did retake the church. Athanasius did a Reconquista of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. If he had run away, if he had started his own Athanasian Global Methodist Church, the Global Athanasian Church or whatever, we would all be Arians and we would all be going to hell, seriously. I mean, God's providence wouldn't have allowed that, but you know what I mean, it's a hypothetical. Because of that, we know that it's possible. We know that this is not the first time in church history the church has gone astray, and it can be corrected. All throughout the Old Testament, we see God's people literally worshiping pagan, demonic idols in the temple. God doesn't tell them to leave the temple. God tells them to reform the temple, and many times they do. And of course, they end up messing up again later. But the church goes astray and comes back many times, Old Testament, New Testament, back then, and right now. So we know it's theoretically possible. Now, there's a specific strategy that makes me mathematically certain we are going to win if we don't give up. And, you know, I study mathematics, but you don't need to be a math student to understand this. The demographics of the mainline church are a crisis for them. There are so few young people that in one generation, all the mainlines are going to be basically dead, demographically speaking. There are more young people on your average, Discord server, perhaps, than your average mainline denomination. Not just mainline church, mainline denomination, if you're talking about active young people who are really active in the church. If we inject a bunch of young people into the mainline churches, which is what Operation Reconquista is doing, if we inject a bunch of solid, traditional young people in now, and then they wait 30 years, they're going to be the only ones left, and the whole denomination falls into their hands. So, I've said why it's theoretically possible. I've said why it's practically possible. And now here's where I'm going to critique conservative strategy in the past. Every single church split in the past 100 years has not been a split. It has been conservatives running away. Every split has been a denomination splitting into the original one and the conservative one. In every split, it's always the liberals who keep the brand, who keep the institutions, who keep the seminaries, who keep the universities, who keep all the property, who keep all the stuff. And it's always the conservatives that have to run away and start something new. And it's important to understand the value of institutions, not just individuals. Individuals don't necessarily make cultural change. It's institutions that make cultural change. And the reason the mainline churches used to have such an influence on the culture is because they had strong cultural institutions. But if we run away from those cultural institutions and give them over to liberals, then we can't expect to have any cultural change. And as conservatives have run away in the past 100 years, run away from their institutional churches, the culture has gotten way less religious. And it's not just churches that conservatives have run away from. In the past 100 years, conservatives have had a retreatist mindset all across the board. They've run away from the mainstream churches. They've run away from the mainstream universities. They've run away from the mainstream cities. They've run away from academia. They run away from everything. But we've seen the fruits of this retreatist mindset. It never works. Retreatism never improves the culture or the church long term. We haven't seen a single example of that. As Albert Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Brief counterpoint. Rod Dreher published a book a few years ago by the name of The Benedict Option. So he makes the case
I know about that book.
You know about it. Well, yeah, he argues that there is historical precedent for the true church to withdraw from culture until it implodes and then to re-inject itself for the salvation of the world. But have you seriously considered that? Do you have a counterpoint to that, or do you just think, nah, that's lame?
Well, if you look at the case with Benedict, who the book is about, yeah, they went into like monasteries and stuff. They made some little sanctuaries for the church, but they didn't split off from the institutional church. They were doing this from the standpoint of a very institutional church that was in league with a bunch of kings and emperors. That is completely different than what modern conservatives are advocating, which is splitting from their own churches and retreating not just from secular society, but retreating from their own religious institutions. So
when
there's a difference between the Benedict option and Benedict.
So at least I can't speak for everybody. I think there are a lot of people who are very susceptible to this kind of independent, non-denominational, let's just reinvent the wheel and do things our own way and not be constrained by the past. And I don't like those people. I don't have much in common with them. But there are other people like me who say we have an amazing heritage, a cultural heritage, that right now we need to cut off all the dross and then re-erect the heritage that we have. And I've just been less concerned about the name on that or the stuff on that. You're very concerned about the name and the stuff, and maybe you could talk about why it is that people who've been willing to abandon the building, abandon the hospitals, the colleges, all the stuff and the accoutrement that have come with it, why they have perhaps made the wrong decision.
There's a few reasons. Number one is that liberal Christians, pastors, seminary professors, are sitting on big piles of money that have been accumulated by generations and generations of donations from faithful Christians. They're living off of Christian money. So many faithful Christians over the generations have donated their estates to the United Methodist Church, to the Episcopal Church, to the seminaries of those churches, not expecting them to drift away from the ideas that they donated to, not expecting the ones who did agree with their ideas to run away and abandon everything they donated to.
So if I put that in my own language, if you're going to honor the legacy of those who came before, then you cannot quickly abandon what they built.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I think our culture is so weak and effeminate these days is people don't care about their heritage anymore. People don't care about preserving their heritage. And heritage doesn't just consist in individuals. It doesn't just consist in individual souls and ideas. That's Gnosticism. It also consists in physical achievements, what people have built up over the centuries. You know, the church in the Middle Ages, they would work on a cathedral for 600 years. If everyone splits off and starts a new thing every generation, you can never do something like that. If there's this mindset that, you know, the second something goes woke or goes liberal, you'll just split off and start something new. What kind of precedent does that set? Even if you do split off, even if you form the Global Methodist Church, what's to say that won't get hijacked too? What are you going to do if that gets hijacked? You're going to keep starting new denominations onto infinity, and that is kind of what a lot of Presbyterian and Protestant, more broadly speaking, denominations have done. And that's why they don't build up anything strong and lasting. That's why conservative Christians are no longer building Harvards and Princetons like they used to. It's why they're no longer building cathedrals like they used to, because they can't commit to anything over the generations. That's one reason. The second reason is that even if we theologically know, we theology scholars know that the conservative offshoots, like the Global Methodist Church, are more faithful to true Methodism than the United Methodist Church. We all know that. But the average person, just walking on the street, the average, whether secular person or uneducated Christian, doesn't know that. Whether we like it or not, whether they are true Christians or not, the mainline churches, the old historic churches, are the representatives of Christianity, or at least Protestantism, to the culture. So imagine you are just walking, you're just a regular member of a town, and you don't know anything about church politics. And one Presbyterian church has been in your town for 150 years. It's right at the center of town, right next to town hall. And they say the Presbyterian church supports queer people and gay marriage and transgenderism. And there's another Presbyterian church that was started 5 years ago. It's on the side of the highway. It meets in a Burger King, and they say no, true Presbyterianism does not support gay marriage. Which one are you instinctively going to take more seriously? Like, aren't you sick of Methodists getting ridiculed? I'm sure that you, if you're a Methodist, or you yourself, I'm sure that when you've called yourself a Methodist, people are like, oh, aren't those the Christians that believe in lesbian bishops? Aren't those
You've talked with Keith Foskey. Have you seen the way that he dogs
Yeah,
United
and I don't
Methodists?
like that, because
Oh, dude, it's so funny.
yeah, there's a lot of I mean, Methodists are nice. You're too nice to get offended, but there's a lot of conservative United Methodists. Like, if you split off from the United Methodist Church, that is not going to stop Methodists from being seen as the liberal Christians. That's not going to stop that. You need to understand that splitting off from a church that has liberalism does not stop the liberalism. I think people struggle to understand that. Separating yourself from the problem doesn't make the problem go away. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. That doesn't work like that.
So if we use a metaphor of a body that has an infection, I grew up, I watched Lonesome Dove, and at one point one of the characters gets an infection in his leg, and you just have to cut it off because you can't stop the gangrene. And I think that's the image that a lot of conservatives have, is this is an ideology that does not stop. It will spread, it will destroy. There is no stopping it. The best thing you can do is sever yourself from it so that the gangrene cannot spread to you. And what your counterpoint is there is no place you can go where they do not follow, so you just have to learn to fight them.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. Like, now, of course, it's nowhere near to the same extent, but in, like, the PCA, there are seeds of wokeness being planted there. Now,
PCA would be the conservative split off from the PCUSA.
Yeah, there's some people that are saying you need to split off from the PCA and join the OPC until that goes too woke, and then you have to start the OOPC, and it goes on forever. It's like we all are in the same pool. So you can't just split off forever. It's like maybe if you were in the Puritan era, you could sail across the sea and start something completely brand new. But we're in the same culture. If you want to go to, like, Mars and start a new colony there, I guess that's like the ultimate retreatism. If you can do that, knock yourself out. But we're in the same culture. If you let liberalism fester, it's gonna keep getting worse. You need to actually cure the infection instead of just separating yourself from it and letting it brew.
So there's a larger cultural and political context in which this conversation is happening, where I'm going to try and do my best to be a counterpoint to you. When you're living in a town that has the old mainline church building and you have the church on the side of the highway, and one is saying we're the true ones, and the other is newer and saying we're the true ones, people like me who've been watching the long march through the institutions know that the likelihood that the old institution is legit is not good. I've learned to be very cynical and pessimistic about any institution that's very old, because I've watched media, I've watched government, I've watched almost every institution of a certain age get fundamentally corrupted from the inside. And so there are a lot of people that I listen to that it's kind of retreatist, it's kind of isolationist, but the notion is that there are worldly forces that they just have more staying power than we do. And so what you're doing, as I see it, is you're pushing back against a cultural norm when you're talking about, hey, we can plant all these young people in here that are sleeper
Yeah.
cells for 30 years. The people, we haven't been living in a culture like that. We live in a culture of immediate pleasure where if they're not fed in their church and they're showing up week after week, year after year in a hostile culture, just count them out. You're talking about working with people that have more staying power than 99.9% of the people in our culture do. So,
Yeah, and it's
yeah, go
worth
ahead.
pointing out that you can be in the mainline institution without being in a particularly liberal congregation, because that's why we have our map of moderate to conservative mainline churches, just so if you want to join the mainline but you don't want to be exposed to like lesbian bishops and drag queens, then, or especially if you have kids and you want your kids to still have good teaching, there are places in the mainline denominations where you can get that. It's just that if we inject a bunch of people into those places now, they're soon going to be the only ones left.
Hmm.
Another thing I would say is, yes, I totally understand the instinct to retreat because there is a long march through the institutions. The cultural Marxists and the Frankfurt School and like Antonio Gramsci, that's exactly what they commanded, and it's working. But what have been the fruits of retreatism? How has retreatism impacted our culture? How has conservatives basically being intellectually ghettoized impacted our culture? How has that impacted the rates of Christianity in the country? It's like a lot of people say the church's job is not to influence the culture. It's just to, preach the word, minister the sacraments. Okay, you say that until your daughter goes liberal and becomes trans, because that has happened to a lot of Christians I know. A lot of Christians, they think they are isolating and sheltering their kids well. They think, but the cultural forces are so strong, it breaks past their barrier that they try to put up around their kids, and their kids go super liberal and destroy their lives the second they get the chance. So you cannot run from the culture. There is no peeing section of the pool. We are all in the same pool.
That's a good
Um,
metaphor. So talk
yeah.
about the way in which the culture is delegitimating voices like yours is to say this is Christian nationalism. This is a form of
Okay,
Christianity
so
which is
what?
not content to stay confined within the walls of the church, but they want to make the whole world the church. They want to conform us all into this righteous relationship with God, even if we don't want to be in it. And they will take away the rights of people to live freely. So your initial response was, okay, so what? Is there anything more substantial to critique that you guys are wanting to coercively impact people? And yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the left coercively impacts people. They spread their religion, and they're not wrong for wanting to coercively impact people. Everyone wishes to spread their ideology to other people. Even if your ideology is that people should respect each other's opinions, that's an ideology, and you're trying to force that ideology on people. You're just being inconsistent. So there is no such thing as ideological neutrality. I'm not even like a presuppositionalist guy, but it's true that every culture has a religion. The word cult, the word cult is the root of the word culture. If you can split Europe into like historically Protestant cultures, historically Catholic cultures, historically Orthodox cultures, and advocating a cultural impact of the church on the world is not the same as a theocracy. The Puritans strongly believed in separation of church and state because they wanted independence from the king. So whenever someone tells me they believe in separation of church and state, I'm always like, you want to be like the Puritans? Me too. So it's like leftists are so historically illiterate. The church has always had an impact on the culture. When Martin Luther King did his civil rights movement, even though Martin Luther King wasn't the most orthodox, he was working with the church to do it. That was the church having an influence on the culture. Are you gonna say that you didn't like what Martin Luther King did? He was a pastor. He was a pastor who preached sermons to have an influence on the culture, regardless of what you think of him specifically. That's what he was doing. I don't think most liberals would want to say that he was doing the wrong thing there. It's just inevitable that people's religion is going to influence people's religion is going to have an influence on the culture. And leftism is a religion. Leftism, just like all religions, has orthodoxy and heresy. An example of a heretical leftist is J.K. Rowling, who is a leftist, but didn't conform to the transgender ideology, so she got excommunicated and anathematized. So, yeah, if now Christian nationalism is such a vague term, there are some definitions under which what we are doing would qualify, but I don't think it matters. What matters is the church has always had an influence on the culture wherever it's gone. In most cases, it's made the culture better. The Christians in Rome banned pedophilia and female infanticide. It was Christian extremists that abolished slavery. A lot of Methodists were involved in that. So yeah, I don't see what we have to apologize for.
Very good. Very good. Let's pivot now. Go
Yeah.
to PCUSA and
Yes.
talk about so the connecting point here. I want to know just personally. You're very productive. You're everywhere. You have a huge audience. You produce your own content, by the way. If somebody looks at you put out like a 6 or 7 minute video just the other day, really helpful, talking about the importance of institutions, and I found it's really impressive how much you produce. And so I wonder if you have at all a team around you, or if you just don't sleep, or what.
Yeah, it'd be nice if I had a team around me, wouldn't it? No, I don't. It is actually on Reddit. A lot of people think I'm like Satan for trying to destroy LGBT affirmation in the church. Someone on Reddit suggested that I'm a right-wing extremist funded by Putin or something. It's like, I wish I had that funding. Sadly, I don't. I'm still waiting for my check. So no, I do all the stuff myself. And I don't do my homework. That's what I do.
There's just no way you can get everything done. So
And I run on a lot of caffeine, but
well, good for you.
I don't know. I gotta help the church. So you asked about the PCUSA.
Yeah, please go ahead and talk about your role. I mean, I wonder. So I've been curious. How many people in the PCUSA listen to you? Or is anyone in leadership listening to you, or are you only grassroots?
We have pastors of every denomination in the Reconquista. We are mostly lay-led. All our leaders, I think, are laymen. But we have, in every denomination, lots of clergy supporting us. I think we have, like, between 20 and 30 PCUSA pastors that are part of our movement. We work very closely with a lot of PCUSA pastors. The Episcopal Church used to have 4 Episcopal priests working... I'm sorry, not the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Reconquista movement. Called the Episcopal Fellowship for Renewal. They had several Episcopal priests that were in the Discord and that were helping them make connections. But recently, due to a queer progressive activist in New York City at Union Theological Seminary named Brad Eubanks, he filed a complaint. He lied against them and saying that they were being inappropriate by being in our Discord server, which includes minors. And they all had to leave the Discord server, and one of them basically got fired from the Episcopal Church because Brad Eubanks broke the 9th commandment and lied about them. So there's an article about that in the Living Church, which you should all read. It's very important to raise awareness about what happened to Reverend Jake Dell. He was the priest who was forced out of the Episcopal Church simply for siding with the Reconquista. But yes,
let's make sure to have a link to that on the show notes here so people can follow up with it. And I was also remiss... For United Methodists who are watching this and you wanted to plug in, your branch is called the Young Methodist for Tradition. We'll put the link to their website in the show notes here as well. So go ahead on the track.
In case anyone's confused, Reconquista is sort of just an unofficial movement, but a lot of official organizations like the Episcopal Fellowship for Renewal, like the Young Methodists for Tradition, and Presbyterians for the Kingdom, a nonprofit that I helped start, were all formed within our movement. So Presbyterians for the Kingdom has an important mission, because this summer there's a progressive presbytery, Olympia Presbytery, that wants to pass an amendment to our Constitution, basically, that would say all elders, deacons, pastors need to be gay affirming. And that would basically be a death blow to any sort of institutional retaking of the mainline. If that passes, then the Reconquista in the PCUSA would have to be entirely lay-led. We would have to basically pull a John Knox rebellion against our ministers, which we could do, but it would be a lot harder. I'm not saying we can't do it. We could do it. There's a lot of cases in PCUSA churches where they have licensed lay preachers because there's just such a shortage of pastors. The math still checks out, where if we get enough conservative lay people in, we could still take over.
You anticipated my question.
That's what's going to be voted on in General Assembly. Now, there is a conservative group standing up against this called the Fellowship Community, and they're a good group, but not quite good enough for us. because we are going to their conference next week. They have a national conference in Nashville, and we were signed up to be presenters there, to be exhibitors there, but they took us off the list because we are not explicitly affirming of women's ordination. We're not against it either. We don't take a side. I mean, they dug up some old videos of mine where I said I was personally against it, but I don't represent the whole deal. And they were also offended by our name Reconquista. They thought that Crusader language was too violent and stuff. So we're still going to go there. We're still mostly friends with them. We're still going to make connections there. But it shows the squishiness of this boomer conservatism that prioritizes being nice over protecting the sheep from the wolves. They're willing to sacrifice the sheep to the wolves in the favor of being nice, in the favor of following procedures that the leftists just stomp on. So I guess we're a bit more aggressive because we were raised in a generation where wokeness was shoved down our throats all throughout school. I'm actually grateful for public schools. I think Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. When I say public school, I'm referring to the way public schools are today. I'm grateful that wokeness is being shoved down the throats of so many young men because they are rebelling against it. I'm in a Discord server with a lot of young men, including a few that are still in school, and the reaction is going to be so strong. There is going to be a young men's revolt in the culture pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, statisticians are talking about young men swinging right while young women are swinging left. And I sure hate
Yeah.
the dating scene for your generation, although I understand that you've done all right.
I
You're
was
engaged.
I was blessed. I got a based fiance, but everyone else is screwed.
Yeah, she's a diamond in the rough, it sounds like. So well, even
Yeah.
in, my wife and I, we met at a liberal seminary in Boston, but we both thought we were lefties, and then we went there and both rebelled against it. So it's a wonderful thing. But anyway, when we're looking at the PCUSA and the squishiness that you're dealing with boomers, of course, this is something that is also across society, and of course, I think it's important when we characterize people we disagree with that we provide something stronger than a straw man, something that they would recognize themselves in. Most of the ones that
Yeah.
I know would not say that they worship at the altar of niceness. What they would say is that the kind of combat that you and perhaps I and others would recommend is spiritually toxic. That there is no way to do it in a way that is that leaves one and one's flock right with God. That when one is in a combative, bellicose mode, that alienates them from the Good Shepherd. So, my response would be to point to Jerome and Athanasius and Martin Luther and warriors of the faith who did not feel at all
Yeah. I was about to
worried
say
about
that.
their. Oh, really? That's your argument too?
I was about to say that. I would say Martin Luther wasn't nice. Athanasius, I don't know. He was strong. He was firm. Saint Cyril of Alexandria really wasn't nice. John Knox for the Presbyterians. John Knox. No preacher was ever more fiery than John Knox. And he was not nice to Mary, Queen of Scots, but he said what had to be said. So it's like the Jesus Christ, the God in human flesh, was not nice to false teachers. We are to be nice to our enemies. We're to be nice, and when I say nice, I mean polite, to pagans. Pagans, people who don't understand the faith. Jesus never got mad at pagans for being pagans. But he got extremely mad at religious leaders with power in the church who were leading God's flock astray. He said it's going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than people who lead God's flocks astray. I think it'll be better for gay porn stars on the Judgment Day than for liberal pastors who deny the gospel.
That's a good. Nothing to disagree with here. When you're talking about PCUSA, the only conservative, I mean, so PCUSA went through the same thing as UMC. It's been hemorrhaging people for decades as it's gone further left. Most of the conservative leadership has left. All that's left is those who have been culled by the leadership who toe the line. And so here you have this group of young people, your group, who is too hardcore for them. And you're talking about, okay, the math checks out. We can still, even if they lose, we can still take over in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
What I wonder about, what I worry, y'all are going to have your General Assembly, and it sounds like you're going to be on the outside of whatever the conservatives are doing, that you're not collaborating with whoever's going to be sitting in General Assembly and figuring out what maneuvers can be made. Do you feel like that's the case, or do you feel like you have a role to play in the General Assembly?
Uh, in terms of, like, basically the higher up the leadership chain you go, the less of an impact we have. But the thing is, most of the people that are excluding us, we don't have to worry about them because in 30 years they're going to be dead. Um, so there are a lot of individual pastors who strongly support us, who like the fact that we are a lay-led movement. Like, the name Reconquista did get us in a bit of trouble, but we kept the name. We were considering dropping the name and thinking of something nicer like Project Athanasius. But it was a pastor who told us to keep the name because they said that pastor said the reason conservatives have lost is because of the squishiness and the milquetoastness of conservatives in the denomination. So yeah, it's going to offend those conservatives, but it's going to be the people that are going to be offended are going to be the same people that have lost the fights for the last 60 years. So maybe it's time for a little change in strategy.
I want to be selfish and talk about Methodism a little bit more. I wonder
I mean,
what
I
you
care about it
think.
too.
Say that again.
I care about it too.
Well, I'm sure you do. But so there have been hundreds of thousands of people who've left the United Methodist Church, joined the Global Methodist Church. If all of a sudden you were our spiritual director and we needed to listen to you, how would you instruct us to get right with God? What track of penance would you prescribe?
Well, it's when it's talk about getting right with God, you have faith in Jesus. This isn't a matter of whether you individually are right with God or not. This is a collective matter of what strategy is gonna benefit God's kingdom most in the long term. And I think retreatism is the worst strategy. I think,
Yeah, we're
especially
clear on what the no is. I want to hear what the yes is. How do we do right by you, Ackerman?
right. Stand your ground. Be like Martin Luther saying, "Here I stand, and I can do no other." And be missionaries and leave your comfort zone, just like the apostles did. And Jesus doesn't call us to find safe spaces. Jesus calls us to go out into the dark places. The apostles went to the pagan cities. They didn't go to the countryside. They didn't move to the rural areas and have 20 kids start a farm and stuff. They went to the cities, and some of them were crucified upside down. So Jesus calls us to suffer and be rejected and be in environments where we suffer and are rejected for our faith. You know, I'm in a denomination where I face a lot of hostility, but I am assured by Christ that that is where I'm called to be. We are called to be in hostile environments. The more hostile environment you're in, the more of an impact you have when you preach the gospel.
So let's be clear here. People who've already left and joined the GMC, would you call on them to go back to a United Methodist Church and serve if at all possible for the sake
Yes.
of? Okay. Okay.
I
That's what I
really think
thought you
there's,
would say.
well,
What
I
about
really think there
clergy who
should be
can't go back?
I think there should be a reunion of the two denominations, really,
Right.
because there's
Okay.
been a lot of in the Presbyterian Church. There's been a lot of splits and reunions. But if you're just like a pastor who's in the Global Methodist Church, but you're like looking for a new call, don't rule out the United Methodist Church. If you can go fill a United Methodist pulpit, you probably should. And yes, it's a hostile environment, but Jesus calls us to go into hostile environments, and that's where we can make an impact. And I'm going to quote the Reverend Jake Dell. He is the Episcopal priest who lost his ordination in the Episcopal Church for supporting the Reconquista. And what he said is when you're in a mainline church, when you're in a liberal church, when you're preaching the gospel there, every time you preach the gospel, you'll be reaching people who have never heard the gospel preached before. Every time he preaches in a liberal mainline church, people go up to him and tell him they've never heard anyone make the Bible make sense before. So that's the benefit of going into these hostile environments.
We got just a couple minutes left, and I need to have you speak to those in the United Methodist Church who might think that if the liberals win, that they'll have a live and let live mentality. It looks like there's going to be a hostile takeover here in a week or two at the United Methodist Church's General Conference. They'll liberalize the sexuality position, and for a time, nobody has to do anything that they don't want to do. We're just going to make it possible so that progressives can do what they want to do. How realistic do you think it is that that will be the case, that they'll have a live and let live mentality if the liberals take over?
I don't know what the case will be, but the number one argument for why Reconquista is possible is if progressives can take over, if progressives can take the church, why can't conservatives take the church back? The only argument as to why they can but we can't is if we are weaker than progressives. A lot of conservatives are like, oh, we're masculine Christianity, but they think they're weaker than three old lesbians. Seriously. I don't know whether they're going to have a live and let live or a strict conformist policy, but the conservatives made the rule. The conservatives ruled against gay marriage, and the progressives simply disobeyed. They simply rebelled. They did not give up. They were facing the hardest of circumstances, but they did not give up. The most inspirational fighters are the progressives. We call progressives snowflakes, but they were hardcore fighters. It was the conservatives that not so much. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks, but whatever it is, don't back down. Don't leave. Stay and fight, just like the progressives did. If they say you need to marry gays, simply disobey. If they sue you, take them to court. Take them to court, just like the progressives did. If they win, call up Tucker Carlson, call up Daily Wire, call up conservative organizations. Don't back down.
You're very persuasive. How can we be praying for you and for the PCUSA?
Well, I'm also praying for the United Methodist Church, so that's equally valuable. But pray specifically that next week when we go to the Fellowship Communities National Gathering, that we can make good connections. And pray that these connections would be worthwhile. Pray that at the General Assembly, the motion to change the Book of Order won't pass. But even if it does, pray that the PCUSA pastors will still stand their ground and keep fighting and not leave the denomination because of that.
Great. Well, thank you for letting us know how we can pray. And then, friends, we appreciate you spending time with us. Keep your eye on what the UMC is doing, what the PCUSA is doing. Just pray for the culture as a whole. Hope you've had some clarity here from Richard. Richard, thank you so much for
Thank you.
spending time with me. Yeah.